Hello everybody, and welcome back to another tutorial from Renderosity on POSER Pro 2014 and POSER 10. I'm Mark Bremer, and in this 20th tutorial here we're going to look at ways to handle the materials on cloth a little bit better than, well, some of the files that you get. We'll have three little exercises in here to explore that. One is working with a really basic POSER character that has merely adequate clothing. We'll look at ways to go ahead and improve that. Then we're going to deal with how to approach cloth that's got a little translucency to it, some light maybe behind it, and we'll be working with some draping type things. And finally we'll end up with some lace and ways that you can accessorize characters, or if you're thinking about getting into content creation for POSER characters, then, well, you'll pick up a few things. Now, some of the clothing that comes with characters is pretty good, and some of it in fact is outstanding, where the author has paid a lot of attention not only to the geometry of the cloth but to the cloth textures. But more often than not, some of the producers that produce accessories for characters, their proficiencies maybe aren't the best in texturing. And so as we look at these, I want you to think of, well, I can go back into these clothes that I purchased or just basic stuff and make it look a little bit better. The whole point is to wind up finding ways to make all your renders better. So enough talking. Let's go ahead and zoom into Jessie here. And wow, serious Jessie. Issues. I've got issues, I guess. Anyhow, looks like she's mad at me. But let's go to the yellow right here. We'll do a quick render right here, and we'll see that, well, she's got a yellow shirt on. We know this, and there is some kind of light and dark going on in it that is part of the texture map. Let me actually change some of the light here because that gray light is not helping us out. So we're going to do a really basic texture modification to this just to give it a little more life. Let's hop into the materials room right here, and I suppose we should select Jessie, and let's select her shirt, and let me expand this here, and we can see that we've got a texture map with just some kind of light and dark color variation, so it's not quite bright yellow. Well, we're going to leave that where it is and not even mess around with it. I am going to add a new node, image map, and let's track down the image I want to use. Now, I'll be working with a texture map here, and you may wonder, where did you get these texture maps? I go to cgtextures.com, and they've got a lot of great stuff to work with, ways that you can, well, go there and play around. You'll like it. I select white textures very often if they're available, or I take them into Photoshop and kind of turn them into a grayscale, because that usually gives me a little more flexibility when I want to apply them to a character and mess around with it. So anyhow, let me go ahead and select OK with that. We'll go all right here. I can see that, yep, we've got that. There are two places I'm going to plug this in. One, you would think, yeah, the bump, let's create a little texture value to it. I'll plug that in real quick, and, well, when we do a render here, and that's actually in the bump channel, to my taste, the bumps are a little too aggressive, and it just, well, does not look good. Obviously, we've got a little scaling issue, so let's go ahead and fix that. But this light and dark, way too much for what we're going to be using. So instead of using the regular bump channel, let me disconnect. I'm going to come down and use the gradient bump channel down here. Now I'll render this out just so we can see what it looks like out of the gate in terms of a difference. It's a little more subtle, and I like that because I don't want people to go, wow, there's a cloth texture pattern on that. I want it to kind of come out in some surprising ways. So the first thing here is that that is, well, too large. Let's come over here to our U and V scale here and reduce this significantly, like, how about 0.1 instead of 1? And we need to do that on both the U and V sides so that it's square. And we'll leave it like that right now. Let's do another render real quick. Now this is not going to be super obvious, but again, that's not what we want to do. So it's got a little more noise. If I go ahead and zoom in on this, there, we can see it showing up a little bit better right here. Go across this, and we can see that the shirt and the sleeves are separated. On some of these stock characters, not a whole lot of attention's given to blending certain parts of clothing. The clothing that you can purchase is usually a little more tidy in terms of that. Okay, well, we've got this light and dark texture, but to push this a little bit further, an excellent place to utilize these textures happens to be up here in the specular channel. Now you'll notice I'm not plugging it into the specular color. I'm taking this texture map and plugging it into the specular value, because this is going to change how much highlight there is on it essentially. So currently it's all black. But what I would like to do is, let's take it to a little lighter shade of yellow. We can see it show up here in the preview a little bit. That might be a little too shiny. And if we wanted, I can actually grab a color out of the image itself. I'm clicking and dragging over the image, and you can see when I do that, the little color indicator is changing as I go across the skin. If we come back to the yellow, then we know we get color that is in harmony with the image right there if we want to. All right, if this is too aggressive, you can always dial back this value. Right now 1 is 100% of the texture. If I go to something like 0.5, that's going to knock it down just a little bit. And if I do a quick render, it's coming up here, and nice little subtle effect. We're picking up some highlights right here. So really fast, easy way to go ahead and bring that in there. You may go, oh, wait a second, you spend this time here developing this texture. How do I keep it consistent and apply it to the sleeves? Fortunately, it's super easy. Just click and drag across all the nodes and copy. We'll come up to Edit, Copy. Then what we'll do is we'll select Sleeves, and all I have to do is select all, and then I paste, and it will replace everything in there. Nice little time saver. This is the render view. Here's the preview. We can see it join in there, and you know, they don't match perfectly right here, but the tiling, the UV scale, matches across this entire image so that it is consistent from the shirt part to the sleeve part. Yeah, again, there's only so much you can do with some of these characters, but hey, here's a nice way to go ahead and make that a little bit better. If we do a render just for sanity check here, there we go. Now the detail looks much finer, and yeah, it's looking better. Okay, so we did that. Let's get out of here and open a new file. Nope, don't need to save that. We'll open, and we're going to come into Draping Cloth. Now, some of the things that you'll see me doing here, how you do it, I actually covered in another tutorial. So if you want to see how bullet dynamic cloths handled, you can do that. I've already adjusted the lights in this scene, and you'll notice when I turn this way, we've got naked Jessie here. We'll cover up modesty and all. The thing that drives me nuts about some of these things, and there's a provision to do it, is that on these very thin objects, you can't see them when you turn it the other way. How do you fix that? Well, you come up to Properties, and you go ahead and say, you know what? How about if I select the cloth plane? And this is the cloth plane that comes out of the props, the high resolution one. Okay, let's scroll right here. And what I want to do is force show back-facing polys. When I do that, I can see both sides, and this becomes very important when we start draping and doing things like that. Okay, to get this in place so we can start working with it, and the reason the lights are set up like this is I want the lights to shine through it, and I'll show a, I guess it's a liability that comes also with the character here, or I should say with this type of thing, if the cloth goes all the way around, and well, anyhow, let's quit talking about that. We'll just hop into it. We've got this set up. I want to come to Windows, and I have this cloth set up with some control points in the bullet physics area right here. So when I go ahead and engage live simulation, and I've made some adjustments to the cloth itself right here. If I, can I close this right here? I don't need my libraries. Close. There we go. Can see a little bit better. I can go ahead and select these handles now. I'll come over to parameters and move this around just a little bit. I will move this back in Z space a little bit. And let's go ahead and lower this. Well, let me grab it and drag it. Let's make this a little bit faster. Wait for the engine to catch up here just a little bit. I have increased the linear stiffness, and I've increased the friction so that I don't get a bunch of cloth poke through while this goes on. And I just wanted to do this because not many people consider posing cloth with the Bullet physics engine, and it's a fantastic thing to be able to do. Let me rotate around my scene just a little bit. Bring this around here. There's Jesse being so demure. And that almost went too far, so we can raise this up a little bit. Alright, you notice we have some intersection issues going on right here with the cube that Jesse's reclining in. Holy cow, she looks like Kilroy here real quick. Let me lower this down just a little bit. If you want to prevent poke through like this, you'll have to go with the standard cloth simulation. But this is not a bad way to get going as he messes around with it. Can we get into the texturing of this already? Okay, we've got our cloth in place. I think that will work for us if we do a quick render. Let's see what this looks like, so we can get a before and after idea here. Alright, we've got this light coming from behind the cloth, and I've got a second light that's kind of a fill light for this light blue here. The light behind is a spotlight that I simply engaged the point to or point at feature on, so it's always pointing at Jesse here, and I cranked up the intensity to about 200%. Anyhow, materials. We'll come over to this and let's select not animated constraint but the cloth plane. Okay, you saw that little texture pattern that I was using earlier for Jesse's shirt. Let's go ahead and pull that in here just to give a little variation. I'll leave the diffuse color right now white. Let's come down to textures, image map, and we'll drive right back and snag that file. Click OK, that comes in. And I know this is going to need to be scaled, so in fact I'll scale it so it tiles a little bit more. Much more surface area than on Jesse's shirt. So instead of going to 0.1, I think I'm going to go to 0.05. And we'll repeat that on the U scale. Alright, with this in place, let me plug this into gradient bump. And frankly, I'm going to want to zoom in here a little bit. If you have gone through the landscape tutorial, you'll see some similarities in how I work with the blanket, or whatever this is, and the same way that you work with leaves on plants. So there's a little more detail about some of the functions that go into that. But okay, let's leave this. You want a little color with a blanket? How about if we make this, oh, a nice light pink? Sure. Okay, the next step for this, and a very, very easy step, is to go ahead and let's add a little skin subsurface scattering to this item. It's going to load in a node. It's going to pick up some color cues already and plug it in here. Let's do a render and see where we stand with this. Super nice, fast, easy way to do this, and we're getting some nice kind of luminosity to it here as it finishes off. Does the pre-calculation for the subsurface scattering, then we get this. So we get a little bit of luminosity showing up where the light can go through it with this draping. But the very next step that we want to do with this is to go ahead then and give ourselves a little translucence. Now the translucence, I don't want it to be, let me click on this and drag over to the pink. I don't want it to be the same color because that's going to be just incredibly bright. I can leave it there and just leave the translucence value low. That's one way to play that game. So instead of making this a dark pink, yeah, I'll leave it the same pink. I sampled it off the color, and let's give this a value of something like 0.1. Do a quick render, and that may be too much actually. This thing may be glowing. Does the subsurface, and then it kicks into the regular render. And yes, that's quite bright. It's more like a sheet. So let's take this down to something like 0.002. The nice thing about leaving the colors consistent and adjusting the value is that you do keep a very, very nice harmony between the diffuse color and then the translucence color. There, that's looking a little bit better. And that may be just a touch too far. No, it's looking okay. Now you'll notice there's no shadow on this from our character. In order to do that, you have to come up to the transparency channel here and give it a very small value. I'll say 0.05. And we'll leave it at that and see how that looks. Now I'd mentioned something about shadowing and little gotchas with the cloth. Let's render through this and see how the shadow looks on that. See if we need to crank up the transparency a little bit. You don't want to see through this, really, but it has to have some transparency for you to be able to pick up shadows on this side of it. We're starting to see the character through there, and that's only with a 0.05. Let me come over here to the preview and maybe reposition this a little bit. My light that's over here, let me check this out and see if I've got that set up for shadows and whatnot. I'll come over here to, let's get back to the pose room real quick. I get to my parameter dials here real quickly. Okay, light 2, properties here, shadows. Let's go with ray traced. And let's give this a blur of something like 1. We'll see how that picks up here as it casts shadows onto the object itself. Let me go ahead and live simulation's off now, so that's not going to move around and keep vibrating like it does sometimes. I can close the bullet physics controls and give ourselves a little larger space here. How much of my life has been spent watching progress bars? I don't even want to think about that. Okay, so there it is. Now our character kicks in and it finishes the render off. So we're getting some nice sheen in the eye a little bit. The light's not super bright on the character. May want to increase that value just a little bit. When you have cloth, if you have soft shadows engaged, and we're doing the ray traced shadows, and you can go ahead and create blur radius for that, the cloth will pick it up as long as it's only on one side. If we drape this over the top of the character's head, what would occur is that you would get hard shadows cast on the inside because that blurring effect doesn't go through two materials. Really important little distinction there. Okay, parameters. I would like to increase the intensity here. Let's go ahead and do 250. That should be bright. By the way, on this cloth, something I did is I increased the subdivisions for it over in the properties for that. If I select this real quick, properties, I want it to smooth the polygons, and I've got a subdivision level of 2, which helps with the folding a little bit and the rendering on that. Just kind of an FYI there. Okay, this is rendering out, looking pretty good from what I can see. Yeah. The light's much brighter. We should go ahead and get a better sense of shadows taking place here. Subsurface is looking fine. We can start to see the highlights along the edge of our character here, which is nice, called a rim light in the photography business. And okay, that's shown up. Not a whole lot of shadows showing through, but we're blurring it too, which is giving us a real nice kind of just soft effect. You can see through it just a little bit. Yeah, the arm is not super crisp here, so that's good. We are getting some nice shadow blurring going on. So here is some nice ways to add. You can see the linear quality that the gradient bump we put in here is giving us, so that it simply looks like more real cloth. Look up over here on this corner here. Let's zoom in here a little bit just to get a real good sense of what's going on. You can see what's happening here. But let's zoom in and see exactly what it looks like in case you're looking at this on a mobile device. So this light texture is showing in here. We can decrease it a little bit if we want to. I didn't add any specularity to this, although we could. And if you wanted to have kind of the sense of a fuzzy blanket, that would actually be a pretty good idea to do that with. Alright, the renders come through here. Yeah, got some nice action going on with that. Okay, next step, let's take a look at lace. This is for folks that want to add some additional accessories to their characters perhaps, or if you want to kind of go venture into being a content creator, there's some very cool things you can do with some of the textures. Let me open up a file here. And I just happened to create in another program, since there's no provision to do this inside of POSER. It's a content manipulation program instead of a content creation program. Let's close this window. Open, not new. Lace. I tried to open a wavefront object file right away. Didn't work. Will never work. You can see I'm only seeing half the cylinder. What we'll do is we'll come over here to Properties, and we need to engage this little option here, Force Show Back Facing Polys again, so we can see this entire thing. When you bring in an untextured wavefront object, the Poser program simply assigns a color to it. It happens to be green. I didn't make it green. I didn't make it any color. It was kind of a default gray. So let's, with this selected here, let's go ahead and jump into the materials room. And the cylinder is selected right now. So for diffuse color, what I want to do is turn this to white. And the reason why is that I'm going to actually plug in a texture map that already has colors in it. You'd heard me say I like using white textures, and this one actually is, but I want to capture the subtleties of the image. Another texture I picked up at cgtextures.com. I only bring that up because, man, they've got great textures, and I hate spending my life trying to find that stuff online. I've got a bunch of textures here. That's not the one I want. I want this one. It's against a black background. It wasn't a pure black background. I had to make some modifications in Photoshop a little bit. You can do the same thing in some other paint programs. In some earlier tutorials, especially the ones on the plants, I talked about working with transparency maps. So I'm going to kind of breeze through that right here. And I'm also going to breeze through the fact that we're going to be using normal maps and possibly occlusion maps, specularity maps. That was covered in the landscape tutorial, so look that up. It's a couple before this, I think, or 3, something like that, maybe more. All right, enough talking. Let's bring this in. And that particular texture has been tiled so that it's a perfect match as it goes through this. So we'll see it show up here. And there we go. Now we want to be able to see through this. So what we'll do is, let me close this up. And the little trick I like to do is copy, paste. And actually, before I do that, let me name this. This will be texture, diffuse. Now let me copy it and paste it. The reason I do this is so I don't have to drive to that directory again when I open a new file. What I want to do is handle the transparency. And I've got a special, alpha mask for that. So let me track that down. We'll swap that out and we'll go to this transparency. So this is that special map we use for that. And I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate it again. We need to make this, in order to make this work, since there isn't an alpha map channel inside of Poser, you have to create things to reverse texture maps that most programs output. Poser is a little bit backwards in that. What's black and white for alphas in most programs is the opposite in Poser. So what I need to do, and I won't tell you why it works, we'll just do this. We're going to come to math functions. And what I need to do is invert it, and this is how I do it. The math argument is changed to subtract. The value, or I should say the numeric input for value 2 is going to be 1. So both value 1 and value 2 have a numeric input of 1. I will take this alpha map or transparency map, plug it into this value slot 2. Then I'll take this math function and plug it into transparency. And let's see, transparency fall off. Let's make sure I am not seeing that, because why? Don't you like to hear people talking to themselves? Okay, let me come in here. How about if I give the transparency value of 1? I'm slow, but I can be taught. Holy cow. All right. Now, this is exhibiting a limitation of Poser, where when you look at it this way, you get these weird overlapping shapes. Poser is not really designed to think like this, and we're forcing it to do that. Well, this is all well and good. Let me go ahead and zoom in on this a little bit. If we do a quick render, just to make sure that that is functioning okay. All right, looks rather flat and unspectacular. Let me go ahead and take one of these lights here. That's the IBL light. Yeah, let's grab another one. Bring that over. There. Let's lighten this bad boy up so we can see a little bit better. There. All right. Okay, back to our cylinder. Props cylinder. The next thing I want to do, let me go ahead and close this up, is to work with a normal map so we can get some nice bump to this, and it's a much more subtle and sophisticated bump than just plugging a black and white or grayscale into the bump channel. So this too will require a texture, and let me go ahead and do texture, copy. What is the problem here, children? There we go. That's not letting me do that for reasons I don't understand. Actually, let me highlight this and we'll just call this trans. New node. Why I can't copy and paste that, I have no idea. Alright, we'll call this normal bump. Pop in a normal map for that, and I used crazy bump for this, although you can do something similar in Photoshop, and there's other tool sets out there to do that with. Normal bump for the Mac side is still free. Alright, that looks good. I'll plug this into gradient bump since that's where normal maps go. And we see a change here, and what I want to do now with specular color is to go ahead, let me copy this, close this up, and I'll do a paste, and we'll name this one specular. I have another specific texture map for that, interestingly enough, called specular. You can see the little bit of white here, and what this will do is prevent the texture here, the lacework, but it could be brocade that you see on some of the other cloth or clothes that you can purchase that have a lot of work put into them. You can add some nice texture to them, going in and messing around and creating some new texture maps. This isn't a Photoshop tutorial, but let me open that. We've got this in here. What I will do is plug this into the specular value, and then I'm going to pick up kind of a gray color out of the image over here, the actual render that we see going on. So it's got this light blue value. We'll go ahead and render this out. And now we're getting some nice definition going on. That normal map goes ahead and drives this very well to give the illusion of roundness. The specular map is allowing us to see more detail on the diffuse map because it's not turning everything to white. As the light hits it, it's not just blunking it out. And if we added a little bit more, let me get back into the preview here, we could go ahead and play with shadows a little bit more on this, but what we've got going on now, let me come back over here and render this, is just a nice way. This could pop onto a sleeve. If you have a tool to create some geometry, you can make collars, but you could do this with all sorts of other things. Fishnet stockings, if you happen to have solid stockings and you want to make them fishnet, it's merely a matter of applying some textured little tricks, just like the kind we learned right here. Nice shadow going on over here. So there are some really easy ways to go ahead and improve existing cloth inside of POSER with some very simple basic material tricks. Have a good time rendering.